Go sit in the storage room, my brother smirked. We need space for important clients. I didn't argue, I just took a seat quietly. Moments later, his secretary rushed in, panicked. Sir, the CEO of Evercrest Capital just arrived. I stood up, smoothed my jacket, and smiled. Yes, I am. His face went pale before he could even speak. You want to know what it feels like to be completely erased? To be told you're worthless by the very people who should lift you up? I'm Audrey Wilson, and my family, the Wilsons of Wilson Enterprises, called me a disappointment. But they had no idea the empire I was secretly building or the storm that was coming for them. Growing up in Connecticut, in the shadow of Wilson Enterprises, it was always clear who mattered. Nathan, my older brother, was the future. Kyle, the charmer, was destined for sales. Brandon, the quiet one, was good with computers. And me? I was the little girl who, at 8, devoured financial statements and, at 12, spotted inefficiencies no one else saw. My dad would just ruffle my hair, call me smart cookie, and tell me, business isn't really for girls, princess. That sting stayed with me. Especially when Nathan's half-baked ideas lost the company millions, but Dad called it a learning experience. I worked 80-hour weeks through my 20s, revamping systems, landing international clients, boosting profits by 43% in my division. I believed merit would win out. I truly did. Then came the board meeting. Dad, turning 65, announced his succession plan. And despite my accomplishments, my education, the undeniable numbers, he named Nathan as CEO. Wilson Enterprises has always been led by a Wilson man, he mumbled, avoiding my eyes. It's just tradition, Audrey. You'll still have an important role. That important role was working under Nathan, who promptly stripped me of my major clients and, in the ultimate insult, moved me from my executive office to a converted supply closet. Client-facing employees need the window offices, he explained, smirking. The next day, I resigned. No dramatic confrontation. Just a letter on my father's desk before he arrived, and I walked out. Only Melissa, Nathan's kind secretary, whispered, "They don't deserve you. But they'll regret this someday." I didn't look back. Instead, I poured my savings and a small inheritance from my mother into something new. I used her maiden name, Hayes. I wasn't hiding, I was building something undeniable. Evercrest Capital started in a tiny office, just me and 2 hungry graduates. We specialized in rescuing struggling manufacturing businesses. Within 5 years, we were managing $500 million. By year 8, we'd crossed $1 billion. My executive team knew, no one in my family was to know. This wasn't luck. This wasn't nepotism. This was all me. From afar, I watched Wilson Enterprises. Nathan rode the momentum of my old initiatives for a bit, but then the decline began. Bad investments, lost clients, outdated tech, typical symptoms of leadership more focused on appearances than fundamentals. Then, 3 weeks ago, the call came. My father had a heart attack. He survived, but key investors pulled out. Creditors were circling. Wilson Enterprises, the company my father had built over 50 years, was weeks from bankruptcy. My first instinct? Let it burn. They made their choice a decade ago. But something, maybe my mother's voice in my head, whispered, family is family. My team dug into Wilson's financials. What they found was worse than I imagined. My brothers had run the company into the ground with a toxic mix of incompetence and hubris. And the irony? Evercrest Capital was on their short list of potential saviors, not because of our past, but because we had a reputation for successful manufacturing turnarounds. When an email for a family business emergency meeting landed in my personal inbox, I decided to go. Not as the CEO of Evercrest Capital, but as just Audrey, the forgotten Wilson daughter. I wanted to see if anything was worth saving. The email was cold, impersonal. No, we miss you. Just a corporate summons after 10 years of silence. My COO, Diane, perched on my desk, eyebrows raised. You're not actually considering going, are you? After everything they did. I swiveled to face the Manhattan skyline. I'm curious. Curious is reading their financial statements, Diane shot back. This is masochism. They're going to try to guilt you into giving them money you earned despite them, not because of them. Maybe I conceded. But I want to see it with my own eyes. The company. Dad. All of it. And you're going as just Audrey, she pressed, not as the CEO who could buy their company with her quarterly bonus? Exactly. I wanted to see how they'd treat me when they thought I had nothing to offer. The drive back to Connecticut was a journey through memories. The exit where Dad always stopped for ice cream, the high school where I was valedictorian, but my brother's mediocre sports achievements still garnered more family celebration. The coffee shop where I drafted my resignation letter. Wilson Enterprises headquarters looked smaller, shabbier. The receptionist didn't recognize me. I signed in as a visitor, sitting on those same uncomfortable lobby chairs Dad had always refused to replace. They were vintage, he'd said. Now, they were just worn out. Kyle was the first brother I saw, hurrying down the hall. He did a double take, plastered on a fake smile. Audrey. Wow, you look corporate. He gave me an awkward side hug. Nathan's running around like crazy preparing for tomorrow. Big potential investors coming. Could save the whole business. He checked his watch. Don't let me keep you. Hello, Kyle. Yes, it has been a while. 10 years to be exact. He had the decency to look embarrassed. Brandon, emerging from the IT department, looked genuinely pleased. He'd aged, premature gray at his temples. Audrey. I can't believe you came. It's really good to see you. His smile faltered. It's bad, AUD, worse than they're admitting. Before he could elaborate, Nathan's voice boomed. Well. Little sis has decided to grace us with her presence. He'd gained weight, lost some hair, and still reeked of whiskey at 11 a.m. Nothing for you to worry about, he waved dismissively. Just a temporary cash flow issue. Once we secure this new funding, everything will be back on track. He eyed me up and down. Dad's expecting us all for dinner tonight. 6. Don't be late. Dad's sprawling colonial seemed preserved in amber. The same furniture, the same paintings, even the same family photos from before I left. When Dad saw me, something flickered in his eyes, surprise, relief, perhaps? Audrey, he said, opening his arms. I hugged him, noting how thin he felt. You look successful, he observed. I am, I replied, offering nothing more. Dinner was stilted. Nathan droned on with optimistic projections about tomorrow's investor meeting. Kyle nodded enthusiastically. Brandon pushed food around his plate. Dad said little, watching us with tired eyes. I excused myself early. As I headed upstairs, I overheard Nathan in Dad's study. Evercrest Capital is our best shot. Their representatives sounded interested. If they invest, the others will follow. And if they don't, my father's voice weaker, than I'd ever heard it. Don't think like that, Dad. We'll get the money. I promise. I paused, tempted to reveal myself right then. Instead, I continued to my old bedroom, sitting on the edge of my childhood bed, contemplating my next move. Later, unable to sleep, I found my brothers in the kitchen. They fell silent when I entered. Don't stop on my account, I said, filling a glass of water. Just business stuff, Kyle said quickly. Nothing that would interest you. I smiled tightly. You'd be surprised what interests me these days. After I left, I lingered in the hallway, listening. Do you think we should involve her tomorrow? Brandon asked. She always had a good head for numbers. Absolutely not. Nathan replied sharply. The last thing we need is her amateur input scaring off Evercrest. They're our last hope. I smiled to myself. I woke before dawn, dressed meticulously. A charcoal pantsuit that cost more than Nathan's first car, but didn't scream its price tag. My mother's simple gold wedding band on a chain around my neck. By 7 a.m., I was at Wilson Enterprises, watching the frantic preparations. I approached Brandon, who was fiddling with the presentation laptop. Need any help? I offered. I'm pretty good with PowerPoint these days. He hesitated, glancing towards Nathan's office. I should probably let me just take a look, I said, sliding into the chair beside him. The presentation was a disaster. Inconsistent formatting, typos, fundamentally flawed analysis. Brandon, these projected growth numbers don't align with your current manufacturing capacity. And this slide about future markets contradicts the data on slide 7. He frowned, looking closer. I told Nathan those projections seemed optimistic, but he insisted. What's going on here? Nathan appeared in the doorway, coffee in hand. Brandon, why isn't the presentation ready? I was just helping him polish a few things, I explained. There are some inconsistencies in the financials. We don't need your help. Nathan cut me off. This presentation has been vetted by actual financial professionals. I bit my tongue. Just trying to contribute. The best way you can contribute is by staying out of the way, Nathan said. The investors will be here in an hour, and we need everything perfect. Perfect was certainly not the word I would use. As the morning progressed, board members and potential investors arrived. Most were older men who barely glanced my way. At 9:45 a.m., 15 minutes before the scheduled start, Nathan approached me. "Oh, Audrey," he said with a dismissive glance. "We need these seats for the real stakeholders. Why don't you sit in the storage room? We'll fill you in later." My expression remained neutral despite the familiar sting. The storage room? It's been converted to a small office, he explained impatiently. Melissa will show you. Carl looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Brandon actively avoided eye contact. Melissa, Nathan's long-suffering secretary, gave me an apologetic look as she led me to what was, indeed, a glorified closet. A metal folding chair sat next to a dusty desk. "I'm so sorry, Miss Wilson," she whispered. "It's fine, Melissa," I assured her. "Actually, it's perfect." The irony wasn't lost on me. A billionaire CEO, relegated to a storage closet in the company her father built. The room was a time capsule of Wilson Enterprises history. Boxes of old product catalogs, framed newspaper clippings, a dusty plaque commemorating Dad's Entrepreneur of the Year award. In one corner, I found a box labeled Family containing old photographs, my high school graduation, the company picnic where I won an innovation contest, my mother's arm around me at my college acceptance. Through the thin walls, I could hear Nathan's nervous voice, rehearsing his opening remarks. Then I discovered something unexpected, a stack of recent financial documents hidden away. I skimmed them, my stomach sinking. The situation was far worse than even my team had uncovered. Wilson Enterprises wasn't just struggling, it was on the verge of complete collapse. At 10:15, I heard Melissa's heels clicking rapidly down the hallway. She burst into the main conference room. "Sir," she called out breathlessly. "Evercrest Capital's representatives are here. They've just pulled up." The room fell silent, then erupted. I stood, removing my casual blazer to reveal the impeccable suit beneath. I checked my reflection in my phone, securing a stray strand of hair, straightening my posture. Then I texted my waiting executive team, "Enter in 5 minutes." It was time to emerge from the shadows. I stood in the storage room, listening as Nathan began his introduction. His voice carried that artificial confidence I remembered so well. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us during this exciting time for Wilson Enterprises. While we face some temporary challenges, we're positioned for an unprecedented comeback. Through the thin walls, I heard the rustling of presentation materials. Board members' questions grew increasingly pointed. "These revenue projections seem extremely optimistic," one noted. "Could you explain the discrepancy?" Nathan's answers became more defensive, more convoluted. The room's energy was shifting. I could feel the potential investors' interest waning. Then came the moment that changed everything. The door to the conference room burst open. I heard Melissa's breathless voice, "Sir, Evercrest Capital's CEO is here." An expectant hush fell over the room. I imagined them all turning toward the main entrance, waiting for the financial savior they'd pinned their hopes on. I counted to 5, took a deep breath, and opened the storage room door. The silence that greeted my entrance was absolute. 20 faces turned to me in confusion. Then shock as understanding slowly dawned. Nathan stood frozen mid-gesture at the head of the table, presentation remote dangling from his hand. "Sorry I'm late," I said calmly, walking to the empty chair at the opposite end of the table. I was reviewing some interesting financial documents in the storage room where I was asked to wait. Nathan recovered first, his face contorting in confusion. "Audrey, what are you doing?" "We're in the middle of an important meeting." Waiting for Hayes from Evercrest Capital, I smiled, placing my business card on the table and sliding it toward the center. That would be me. Audrey Hayes. I reverted to my mother's maiden name when I started my company. One of the board members, Mr. Fitzgerald, who'd been with the company since my father's early days, picked up my card. His eyes widened. Audrey Wilson is Audrey Hayes? The Audrey Hayes, CEO of Evercrest Capital. I nodded, removing my company ID from my pocket and placing it beside the card. The very same. The room erupted. Kyle's mouth literally hung open. Brandon stared with a mixture of shock and, was that, admiration? The board members whispered urgently. Nathan's face had drained of color. This is some kind of joke, he stammered. You can't be, I assure you, it's not a joke, I replied evenly. Evercrest Capital manages assets of over $3.2 billion. We specialize in manufacturing turnarounds, particularly family businesses facing succession challenges. I paused. Sound familiar? But you've been, what? Working as a secretary somewhere all these years. Nathan sputtered. How could you possibly? After I left Wilson Enterprises, I interrupted, I founded Evercrest with my savings and a small inheritance from Mom. We've grown exponentially year over year for the past decade. Forbes featured me last month, actually. The invisible billionaire, they called me, due to my preference for privacy. Nathan attempted to regain control. Everyone, let's take a short break. Audrey, I need to speak with you privately. I don't think so, I said, my voice firm. I'm here as an invited potential investor, and I'd like to continue this meeting. I turned to the board. If that's acceptable to you? Mr. Fitzgerald nodded, a small smile playing at his lips. Several other board members murmured agreement. Excellent, I said, opening my portfolio. Now I've reviewed the materials you provided to my team, as well as some additional documents I found while waiting in storage. I have several concerns I'd like to address. For the next 30 minutes, I methodically dissected the company's financial situation, pointing out the mismanagement, poor strategic decisions, and accounting irregularities that had brought Wilson Enterprises to the brink. I was professional but unsparing, backing every criticism with specific examples and data. Nathan's face grew increasingly red. When I finished, he exploded. This is ridiculous. You come back after abandoning the family. Nathan, maybe we should listen, Kyle said quietly. No. Nathan slammed his hand on the table. She doesn't know what she's talking about. She's been gone. She's an outsider. Actually, Brandon interjected, surprising everyone, everything she said is accurate. I've been trying to raise these same issues for years. The room fell silent. Then, from the doorway, came a voice I immediately recognized. Let her speak, Nathan. My father stood there, looking older and frielier than he had at dinner, but with the commanding presence that had built Wilson Enterprises from nothing. He walked slowly to an empty chair, nodded for me to continue. Thank you, I said, acknowledging him with a slight nod before addressing the room again. Despite these challenges, I believe Wilson Enterprises has a solid foundation worth saving. The brand still has value. The core product line remains competitive. The workforce is skilled and loyal. I laid out my proposal. Evercrest would provide emergency capital in exchange for a controlling interest. There would be a restructuring of leadership, with performance-based metrics determining who stayed. The company would refocus on its most profitable product lines, modernize its manufacturing. This isn't a hostile takeover, I clarified. It's a rescue operation. But it requires acknowledging reality and accepting significant changes. Nathan scoffed. So you want us to hand over the company Dad built to you after you walked away? I didn't walk away, Nathan. I was pushed out. You moved me to a closet, very much like the one you put me in today. I met his gaze steadily. But this isn't about the past. It's about whether Wilson Enterprises has a future. Kyle, always the peacemaker, attempted to mediate. Maybe we should consider Audrey's proposal. We do need the capital, and her track record speaks for itself. Brandon nodded in agreement. Nathan looked to our father, clearly expecting him to back him up. Dad, tell them this is crazy. We can't let an outsider take control, even if she is family. Dad was quiet for a long moment, looking between us with tired eyes. For 10 years, he finally said, I've watched this company decline under your leadership, Nathan. I defended you, made excuses, convinced myself things would turn around. But they haven't. He turned to me. And for those same 10 years, I followed your success from afar. Read every article about Evercrest. Tracked every acquisition. Kept a file of everything you've accomplished without the Wilson name or connections. This revelation stunned me. He'd been watching my career all along. You were always the one with the real vision, Dad continued. The drive, the discipline. I was wrong to overlook you because of tradition or gender or whatever foolish reason I told myself. He looked around the table. We should listen to Audrey. Not because she's family, but because she's earned the right to be heard. The room was silent as the weight of his words settled over everyone. Nathan looked as though he'd been slapped. Kyle appeared relieved. Brandon wore an expression that said, finally. I maintained my professional demeanor, though inside, emotions threatened to overwhelm me. Thank you, I said simply. I'll need complete access to all financial records and operations before making a final decision. My team is waiting outside and can begin the assessment immediately. I'll require an answer on my terms within 48 hours. I stood, gathering my materials. This meeting is adjourned for now. I suggest everyone take time to consider what's truly best for the company's future. As I walked out, board members and investors parted to let me pass, several nodding respectfully. Nathan remained frozen at the head of the table, his presentation forgotten. Kyle followed me, already trying to establish himself as my ally. Brandon hung back, but gave me a small thumbs up when our eyes met. At the door, Melissa waited with a smile. As I passed, she whispered, "That was badass, Miss Hayes." Indeed, it was. The Montclair Hotel's presidential suite had been transformed into Evercrest's temporary command center. When I entered, my executive team looked up expectantly. So, Diana asked, how did our little surprise go over? I kicked off my heels, dropping onto the nearest sofa. About as well as you'd expect when you reveal to your estranged family that you're secretly a billionaire who could buy their failing company with pocket change. That good? Marcus grinned. Nathan looked like he was having a stroke, I admitted, feeling a mixture of vindication and unexpected guilt. Dad actually defended me. Said he'd been following my career all along. Seriously? Diane raised an eyebrow. The same dad who passed you over for being female? I shrugged, the emotional complexity of the day finally hitting me. People are complicated. Once my team dispersed, I allowed myself a moment alone. 10 years of proving myself, of building something from nothing, had culminated in today's revelation. The victory should have felt sweeter than it did. My phone began lighting up with notifications. Nathan had tried calling 3 times. Kyle sent a rambling, sycophantic text. Brandon's message was simpler, I'm sorry. You were always the smartest one. Let me know how I can help. Dad hadn't reached out. I ignored them all, staring out at the Connecticut skyline I'd left behind a decade ago. The satisfaction I'd anticipated felt hollow, mixed with complicated grief for what might have been. Diane found me an hour later. The preliminary numbers are even worse than we thought. They've been cooking the books for at least 2 years. Classic case of hiding declining revenue with creative accounting. Could criminal charges be involved? I asked. Possibly. It's more incompetence than malice, from what I can tell, but the SEC might see it differently. I nodded, still distracted. What would you do, Diane, as a purely business decision? She considered the question carefully. Objectively, I'd walk away. There are better investment opportunities with less emotional complication. The Wilson name isn't worth what it once was. Unless, objectively, it's your family, Audrey. Despite everything. She sat beside me. But that doesn't mean you owe them salvation. There's a difference between forgiveness and setting yourself on fire to keep others warm. A knock at the door interrupted us. Samuel Wilson, the hotel staff announced. Dad looked even more fragile in the elegant hotel surroundings. He stood awkwardly, declining a seat. I won't stay long, he said. I just needed to speak with you privately. Diane excused herself. Impressive operation you've built, Dad observed, gesturing to the laptops and documents. Thank you. An uncomfortable silence stretched between us. "I'm sorry, Audrey," he finally said. "For 10 years ago. For all of it." I'd imagined this moment countless times, rehearsed the accusations I would level. Now, faced with his genuine contrition, those prepared speeches evaporated. "Why?" I asked simply. "Was it really just because I'm a woman?" He shook his head, looking ashamed. "That was part of it, outdated thinking I was raised with. But mostly, it was fear. You were so much more capable than your brothers. So much more like me than any of them. I was afraid you'd build something better than I had. Make my legacy seem small in comparison." He gave a sad laugh. "And then you went and did exactly that anyway." "I didn't do it to spite you," I said quietly. "I know. You did it because it's who you are. A builder. A visionary." He met my eyes directly. "Like I used to be, before I got caught up in preserving rather than growing." Another silence fell. "There's something else," he said finally. "Something the boys don't know yet. My health situation is more serious than I've let on." The heart attack revealed advanced coronary disease. The doctors give me a year, maybe 2, with aggressive treatment. The news hit me harder than expected. Despite everything, he was still my father. "I'm sorry," I said, meaning it. "I don't tell you this for sympathy," he clarified, "but because I need you to understand what I'm asking. Wilson Enterprises isn't just a company to me. It's my life's work." The thought of it disappearing, of nothing remaining to show for 50 years of building, he trailed off, emotion catching in his throat. "You want me to save it?" I finished for him. "I want you to consider saving it," he corrected. "Not for Nathan or Kyle or even me, but as a legacy worth preserving, flawed though it may be." After he left, I sat alone for a long time, conflicting emotions warring within me. The professionally detached CEO in me said to walk away. Wilson Enterprises was a risky investment at best. The wounded daughter wanted nothing more than to reject their desperate need, to let them face the consequences of pushing me away. But another voice whispered insistently, my mother's. She had always been the compassionate counterbalance to Dad's ruthless pragmatism. "Family is family," she would say, "even when they disappoint you." I called my therapist, Dr. Levine, for an emergency session. I built Evercrest to prove them wrong, I admitted, to show my father he made a mistake choosing Nathan over me. "Now that I've done that, what's left?" "Perhaps," she observed, "the more important question is." That question lingered with me as I directed my team to conduct a thorough analysis of Wilson Enterprises' financials. They worked through the night, uncovering the full extent of the company's troubles. By morning, I had the complete picture. It wasn't pretty. Years of mismanagement had left the once thriving company on life support. Yet, beneath the dysfunction, I could still see the bones of something worth saving. The core manufacturing technology remained sound. Several product lines continued to perform well despite neglect. Most importantly, many loyal employees had stayed, keeping things running through sheer determination. After 48 sleepless hours, I made my decision. I would help save Wilson Enterprises, but on my terms, with clear boundaries between family and business. 3 days after my dramatic revelation, I returned to Wilson Enterprises with my full executive team. We arrived precisely at 9 a.m., striding through the lobby like a tactical unit. Employees whispered as we passed. Word of my true identity had spread. The boardroom had been prepared for our arrival. Fresh flowers, premium coffee, presentation materials meticulously arranged. Nathan stood stiffly near the head of the table. Kyle hovered nearby, smiling too broadly. Brandon waited quietly by the projection equipment, looking more at ease than I'd seen him in years. The board members filed in, followed by my father, who took a seat to the side, present but deliberately not at the head of the table. "Good morning," I began, once everyone was seated. "Thank you for agreeing to this meeting on such short notice. My team has completed our preliminary assessment of Wilson Enterprises' financial position and operations. Today, I'll present our findings and a proposed path forward." For the next hour, I laid out in meticulous detail exactly what had gone wrong with the company and when. I was professional but unflinching. Nathan squirmed as I highlighted his European expansion failure. Kyle looked at the floor when I mentioned the loss of 3 major clients under his sales leadership. The company currently has negative cash flow of approximately $2.3 million per month, I concluded. At this burn rate, without intervention, Wilson Enterprises will be insolvent within 45 days. A heavy silence fell over the room. However, I continued, we believe the company can be saved with immediate, decisive action. I outlined our proposed turnaround plan. Evercrest would provide emergency capital of $50 million in exchange for 60% ownership. There would be a complete restructuring of the executive team based on merit, not family connections. And profitable divisions would be sold or shuttered. Manufacturing would be modernized. Additionally, I said, looking directly at the board, I will require installation as chairperson, with full authority to implement necessary changes without interference. Nathan stood abruptly. This is outrageous. You're talking about a hostile takeover of a family business. I'm talking about saving a family business that you've run into the ground, I replied calmly. The alternative is bankruptcy within weeks. Your choice. We can find other investors, he insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. Can you? I raised an eyebrow. In time with these financials? Be my guest. Mr. Fitzgerald cleared his throat. Nathan, perhaps we should consider Miss Wilson's offer seriously. The timeline she's presented aligns with our own projections. Nathan looked around for support, but found little. Even Kyle was studiously examining his coffee cup. This is still a family company, Nathan said desperately. Dad, tell them. All eyes turned to our father. He looked older than his years as he slowly rose to his feet. When I founded Wilson Enterprises, he began, his voice steadier than I expected. I had nothing but determination and a belief that I could build something worthwhile. Something that would last beyond me. He looked around the room. Somewhere along the way, I confused preserving my control with preserving the company itself. He turned to Nathan. Son, I did you no favors making you CEO before you were ready. I set you up to fail because I couldn't let go properly. Then to me. And Audrey, I failed you by not recognizing your talents when they were right in front of me. The room was utterly silent. This company bears our name, he continued. But its future matters more than our pride. If Audrey and her team can save what we've built, give employees security, and restore Wilson Enterprises to something we can be proud of, then we should be grateful, not defensive. Nathan stared at our father in disbelief. You're taking her side after everything I've done? This isn't about sides, Nathan, Dad interrupted firmly. It's about survival. While Nathan processed this betrayal, Kyle, ever the opportunist, stepped forward. I think we should accept Audrey's offer. I'm happy to continue in whatever capacity would be most helpful. Brandon nodded in agreement. The plan makes sense. It's our best option. Backed into a corner, Nathan requested a private conversation with our father. They disappeared into an adjacent office. 20 minutes later, Nathan and Dad returned. Nathan's face was flushed, but his demeanor had changed. After discussing the situation with our father, he announced stiffly, I've decided to accept Evercrest's offer, with one condition. I remain on the executive team in some capacity. I considered this. Keeping Nathan involved would be complicated, but firing him outright might create unnecessary resistance. You can remain as VP of Client Relations, I decided. Your institutional knowledge of long-term clients will be valuable during the transition. However, I added, this position will have clearly defined performance metrics, like every other role in the new structure. Nathan clearly hated the demotion, but recognized it was the best offer he would get. He nodded curtly. With that settled, the board voted unanimously to accept Evercrest's investment. The following weeks were intense. My team and I worked 16-hour days, implementing the turnaround plan. The first executive meeting under the new structure was predictably tense. Nathan sat silently fuming as I outlined the changes. Kyle adapted quickly, already trying to position himself as my trusted lieutenant. Brandon seemed relieved to finally have his technical expertise valued. From now on, I announced, advancement will be based on merit, not family connections. Everyone, including myself, will be held to the same performance standards. Implementation wasn't easy. Nathan engaged in subtle sabotage, forgetting to include me on important client communications, undermining my directives, spreading rumors. After catching him in a particularly damaging lie, I called him into my office, formerly his office, which surely added to his resentment. "This stops now," I said, sliding evidence of his sabotage across the desk. "I understand this transition is difficult for you, but your behavior is harming the very company you claim to care about. You have no idea what it's like," he seethed, "to watch everything Dad built, everything I was supposed to lead, handed over to my little sister who abandoned us." "I didn't abandon the company, Nathan. I was pushed out. By you." I let that sink in before continuing. "But that's the past. Right now, we have 300 employees depending on us to save their jobs. Can you set aside your ego long enough to help them?" Something in my appeal seemed to reach him. Not completely, but enough that his active resistance began to diminish. Kyle, predictably, proved to be a weather vane, pointing whichever way the wind of power blew. Once he realized my leadership was firmly established, he became enthusiastically supportive. His sales skills were genuinely valuable when properly directed and monitored. The real surprise was Brandon. Given actual authority and resources, he flourished. His technical innovations streamlined manufacturing, saving millions. We discovered a natural sibling shorthand, often finishing each other's sentences during planning sessions. The bond we might have formed as children began growing in adulthood. 6 weeks into the restructuring, we faced a crisis. Our largest client, Henderson Medical Supplies, was threatening to leave. Nathan had cultivated the relationship for years, but they were upset about our new quality control procedures. "We need this account," Nathan stressed before the emergency meeting. "Whatever they want, we should give them." "Not if it compromises our new standards," I replied. "We'll listen, but we won't promise what we can't deliver." The meeting began tensely. Henderson's CEO complained about unnecessary bureaucracy. When Nathan began immediately capitulating, I intervened. "Mr. Henderson, I understand your frustration with the changes. Change is difficult for everyone. But let me explain why these new procedures are actually to your benefit." I outlined how our enhanced quality controls would reduce defect rates, improve consistency, and ultimately save them money. I shared data from other clients who'd seen improvements. Additionally, I added, as a gesture of good faith, we'll extend a 5% discount for the next quarter while we prove the value of these changes. By the end of the meeting, Henderson agreed to stay and was considering increasing their order volume. As we left, Nathan grudgingly admitted, "That was impressive. I've been trying to get them to increase orders for 3 years. Different approaches work in different situations," I replied, not unkindly. "Your relationship with them got us in the door. My data convinced them to stay." It was our first moment of genuine professional respect. The company's turnaround gained momentum. Operational costs decreased. New clients, attracted by our improved quality, signed contracts. Employee morale improved. My father attended weekly update meetings, sitting quietly at the back. After one particularly positive session, he asked me to join him for dinner at his house. The family home felt different now, less intimidating. "You've accomplished more in 2 months than Nathan did in 10 years, Dad said without preamble. I had a stronger foundation to start with, I replied, not wanting to deepen the rift. And a more urgent situation that allowed for dramatic changes. He smiled slightly. Always diplomatic when it counts. Your mother was the same way. The mention of Mom created a moment of shared remembrance. I've been thinking about her a lot lately, he admitted, wondering what she would think of all this, of what I did to you. She would have been disappointed, I said honestly. But she also believed in second chances. He nodded, looking down at his barely touched dinner. That's what I'm hoping for. A second chance to be the father you deserved. The words hung between us. I'd like that, I said finally. But it will take time. Trust isn't rebuilt overnight. I understand. He hesitated, then added, would you consider making these dinners a regular thing? Just to talk. No business. It was a small request, yet monumental. A first step toward healing. I think I can manage that, I agreed. The following week, I instituted a new tradition, family dinner every Sunday evening. The first few were awkward, conversations stilted. But gradually, something shifted. Nathan brought his wife and teenage sons, who were curious about their badass aunt. Kyle actually prepared a dish. Brandon showed up early to help set up. During the third dinner, Nathan made a self-deprecating joke about his failed European expansion. We all froze until I laughed, genuinely laughed, and the tension broke. Soon, everyone was sharing stories of business missteps and lessons learned. For the first time in over a decade, it felt like we might actually become a family again. Different from before, with clearer boundaries and expectations, but a family nonetheless. 6 months passed in a blur of strategic decisions, operational changes, and careful rebuilding. What had once seemed impossible was now reality. Wilson Enterprises was not just surviving, but beginning to thrive again. The most significant development came unexpectedly. During a routine review of potential acquisition targets, my Evercrest team identified surprising synergies between our portfolio companies and Wilson Enterprises' core business. What began as a rescue operation evolved into a strategic merger, with Wilson Enterprises becoming the manufacturing arm of a larger, more diversified operation. The day we announced the formal merger was surreal. I stood at the podium in the company atrium, facing employees from both organizations, my family seated in the front row. Today marks not an ending, but a new beginning, I told them. Wilson Enterprises and Evercrest Capital are stronger together than apart, combining century-old manufacturing expertise with cutting-edge financial and operational strategies. I glanced at my father, who nodded slightly, pride evident in his eyes. The company transformation had catalyzed family transformation as well. Nathan had initially struggled, but found his niche in client relationship management. We'd reached a professional peace that seemed impossible months earlier. Kyle thrived. Brandon developed into an exceptional technical director. We discovered a natural sibling shorthand. Our father attended board meetings regularly, offering historical context without attempting to control outcomes. His doctors reported surprising improvements in his condition, attributing it to reduced stress and a renewed sense of purpose. The weekly family dinners had evolved from awkward obligations to genuine gatherings. We were learning to be a family defined by more than business. One evening, I encountered Mr. Fitzgerald, the senior board member who had witnessed my humiliation and triumph. I always knew Samuel made the wrong choice, he told me. But perhaps it worked out for the best in the end. You built something remarkable on your own terms, without the Wilson legacy as a crutch or a burden. Perhaps, I agreed, though I couldn't help wondering how different things might have been. The most meaningful conversation came on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Dad had asked me to help sort through old company documents in his home office. I found something you should have, he said, handing me a worn leather portfolio. Inside was my business plan from when I was 16, proposing Wilson Enterprises' expansion into medical equipment manufacturing. The very plan he had dismissed as unrealistic. I kept it all these years, he admitted. Sometimes I would take it out and look at it, especially after you left. The medical division you proposed would have positioned us perfectly for the pandemic boom. He shook his head ruefully. Just one of many missed opportunities. We can't change the past, I said, touching the faded pages that represented so much youthful hope and subsequent disappointment. No, he agreed. But I want you to know that I always saw your potential, Audrey. I was just too afraid of being overshadowed to nurture it properly. That was my failure, not yours. Coming from a man who had rarely admitted failure of any kind, the words carried immense weight. Thank you for saying that, I replied simply. Later that week, during our executive leadership meeting, we discussed succession planning. Ironically, the very issue that had driven me from the company a decade earlier. We need to establish clear criteria for future leadership, I explained, based on merit, skills, and demonstrated capability, not family connections or seniority. Nathan, who might once have taken this as a personal attack, nodded in agreement. The next generation should earn their positions, he said, glancing at his teenage sons who occasionally intern. No shortcuts or assumptions, I confirmed. Exactly. We'll create development tracks for promising employees, family or not, with mentorship, education, support, and progressive responsibilities. As the meeting concluded, I found myself reflecting on the journey from storage closet to boardroom. The vindication was sweet, yes, but the healing was the true victory. The ability to lead without anger, to collaborate with my brothers without resentment simmering beneath the surface. I had spent years building Evercrest to prove my worth to a family that had undervalued me. The irony was that true satisfaction came not from proving them wrong, but from creating something that made all our lives better. Success wasn't revenge. It was the freedom to move beyond the need for revenge. That evening, I stood in my office, once my father's, briefly Nathan's, now legitimately mine, looking out at the manufacturing floor where workers moved with renewed purpose. The Wilson name still adorned the building, but its meaning had evolved. No longer a patriarchal kingdom, but a modern enterprise where contribution mattered more than connection. So, what's the lesson in all this? That sometimes being underestimated is your greatest advantage. That building yourself outside the shadow of family expectations can forge a strength no inheritance could provide. That healing doesn't require forgetting the past, but it does require releasing its power to define your future. And perhaps most importantly, that the storage room where they seat you might just offer the perfect vantage point to observe exactly what needs changing before you emerge to change it. What about you? Have you ever been underestimated, only to prove everyone wrong? Or found yourself needing to set boundaries with family in your professional life? Drop a comment below and share your experience. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe to my channel, and share with someone who might need to hear that being underestimated today doesn't determine their success tomorrow. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember, sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's building something so remarkable, they can't help but recognize what they almost lost.